It's Friday, the 13th of September. I'm Anthony Day. This is the Sustainable Futures Report. This week's episode is devoted to a matter of principle. Would you be arrested for your principles? Would you go to prison for your principles? I recently met Zoe Cohen, who believes that she should go that far to protect herself, her family, and indeed the rest of us from the risks of catastrophic climate change. She was arrested in London at the Extinction Rebellion protest at Easter. She's appeared in court and goes to trial next month. In the meantime, she's going down to London to take part in Extinction Rebellion's October protest. We had a wide-ranging conversation. Here's what she told me.
Let me start by introducing you, or perhaps asking you to introduce yourself, because you are a highly experienced coach, and in fact your role in business has been much broader than that, because you've been a board-level director in some pretty large organisations. So although you have got a very strong interest in the environment and the climate crisis, that is not your profession. You are more concerned with the success of business, if that's fair. And I think you'll agree that if we don't actually solve the climate crisis, nobody's got a future in anything.
I would certainly agree with the latter. your latter sentence there, Anthony, definitely. I would say I'm kind of probably in my third career now. My first career was as a director in the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
Types and different sizes of NHS organisations, and I was kind of board level for 9 years in organisations of different shapes and sizes and significant turnovers, and then I set up my own executive coaching practice and have run my coaching practice for a decade, so that's kind of very much my second career, which I would say I'm still in, but I, for the last 9 months or thereabouts, I've been transitioning into what is probably my third career. I always thought I'd have a third career. I must admit, I thought it would be a yoga teacher, but it's not a yoga teacher. Maybe that'll be my fourth career. My third career, which is largely unpaid, but is as climate activist. So I'm doing both. I'm wearing both hats very much: executive coach and director of my own small business, and more and more climate activism, which is large.
Yes, and of course you went to London at Easter when Extinction Rebellion decided to try and lock down central London, and you demonstrated your commitment to the cause to the extent that you were arrested, and you've already appeared in court once, and I believe you have to go back for trial in October. Now that's quite a step, because I think anybody would describe you as a highly responsible member of society, and all of a sudden you are getting arrested, and you are standing up to them and saying no. Well, tell me what your position is.
My position, I was smiling to myself when you were saying all of a sudden I was standing up. I was actually sitting down on the floor. I was actually sitting on the ground in Parliament Square, peacefully road blocking. But yes, and I made the decision to go public about my arrest and court plea hearing, which happened at the beginning of August. I deliberated long and hard about it, but I decided to go public because I really want to normalise people from all walks of life being part of a non-violent direct action movement like Extinction Rebellion. And being totally honest with yourself and any lovely people who are listening to this podcast, Anthony, I've never been involved in non-violent direct action before I got involved in Extinction Rebellion. I've been passionate about sustainable development, kind of global justice, the environment, non-human species as well as human justice, etc., since I was little, and I've done things outside of my work life, in a voluntary and community sense from a very young age in all sorts of ways. And like many people, or a substantial number of people, I think, who've become involved in Extinction Rebellion, and I talk to and train a lot of people, and a lot of them have similar stories that they've been trying to tread lightly on the planet most of their lives, and trying to do not just do their bit, do way more than their bit, plus do community activism, or that kind of stuff. And I think in the recent months and years, many of us have realised that that's just not enough. I don't think it was ever enough, but we believed it was enough, or we do believe that these small things together could add up. But we have more than enough data to tell us that that's just not the case. Thank you for saying I'm an upstanding member of the community, or whatever language you used, Anthony. But I am an educated professional woman. I've got 3 master's degrees. I know one end of a bit of science from another. And I'm not a climate scientist, but I've got enough training and experience and expertise to believe the science when I see it. And, I genuinely believe that the message that Extinction Rebellion and others, whether that's Greta Thunberg, or whether that's a whole bunch of climate scientists like Kevin Anderson and others, say that, we are in an absolute emergency situation. And if we want to have any chance of averting utter catastrophe, we've got to do an awful lot now. And it involves a level of changing our lives and lifestyles way beyond what governments and politicians are owning up to.
Right, okay. Well, since the protest at Easter, the government has paid lip service, I think, and no more. To the problem, because they've changed from an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050 to a 100%, and 2050, of course, is way, way out. They've also said that they're going to set up a citizens' assembly. But this is talk, nothing's actually been done, and unfortunately, as we well know, the present government is fixated on one single issue to the exclusion of all else.
Yes,
that's probably why Extinction Rebellion is going to go ahead and try and lock down London again on the 7th of October. We have a much more right-wing Home Secretary now, and the Metropolitan Police was saying it's going to take a very hard line. In fact, it is taking a hard line in that it is charging everybody that it arrested. So will you be going down on the 7th of October? What do you see as the future for all this?
I definitely plan to, Anthony, along with thousands of others. It might sound all highfalutin or whatever people think, but I genuinely believe that personally, and as a mother and a human, I have a moral obligation. I genuinely believe I have a moral obligation, because lots of people around the earth are suffering already and have died, or are having extreme suffering from all sorts of climate impacts already, and ecological impacts. I've got a 16-year-old daughter. She's a big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. And the same sort of motivation goes for many parents, grandparents that I've met along the way. And, the 76-year-old grandma who was arrested when I was arrested in Parliament Square, and more besides. And, I genuinely feel that as a parent, I have to look my daughter in the eye, knowing what I know. It's like, once you actually really absorb the scientific truth, I cannot not act. So when I stand up and speak for Extinction Rebellion, which I do, I give the Heading for Extinction talks, and I train other people to do those talks around the Northwest and beyond. And when I do that, I genuinely introduce myself by saying, I can't not do this. I can't not be involved. It is a drive to act, which is so strong, because a big chunk of that is about being a mum.
Okay. But leaving aside whether or not Extinction Rebellion will be successful later this year, do you believe that we are in time to actually be able to change things? Or have you heard what Guy McPherson and Jem Bendell say, which seems to suggest it's all over?
Yeah. It's the million dollar question, isn't it? Or whatever the right phrase is nowadays. I think I've got several answers to that, or versions to that answer, Anthony. I haven't read Guy McPherson's book, but I have watched a number of his YouTube videos, and I've read obviously Jem Bendel's Deep Adaptation and watched some of his stuff as well. And I think Jem's not quite in the same place as Guy McPherson, is he? He's not quite in the same place of immediate, near-term human extinction. He's more in the place of actually we're heading for social collapse, but we don't know beyond that. So they're not quite in the same place, is my understanding. I'm probably not far off Jem Bendel's position, but I guess the position I come from is that, just for me personally, and I think this is an evolving situation, so I'm not putting a line in the sand saying this is how I'll always feel, because things are evolving, and we haven't got time. We've got so little time to start making major change before we really won't have time. All the very recent evidence with the very scary melting at the Arctic and the Greenland ice sheets and stuff seem to be pointing to what a significant number of people feared, that the IPCC was far too conservative and behind the curve, and that things are happening much quicker than they said they would. And that was a critique that's been around for a while anyway. But to actually experience, not directly experience because I'm not on the Greenland ice sheet, but to actually read, with the benefit of global media and social media now, one can see things pretty quickly. And, there is so much horror going on right now with the rate of melting, the rate of, only just literally earlier on today, I was looking at some news stuff come out on the fires in the Amazon. So not only is the Amazon being cut down at an extraordinary and ever-increasing rate and nearing its own tipping point, but there are thousands of fires going on in the Amazon right now, as well as the enormous fires in the boreal forests, in Russia and so on. The scale of this is just huge, and I think there's quite a possibility that we've gone past the point of no return, but we don't. We don't know it, and it's probably impossible to absolutely prove. And why spend our time trying to research and prove that rather than actually just acting? Because we don't know for sure where the exact tipping point is. I don't know for sure where it is. There's the hothouse Earth scenario that was published last year, where the writers that they thought it was about two degrees, didn't they? A 2-degree warming will hit into a hothouse Earth scenario where tipping cascades will set off changes that we won't be able to act on. Some people believe that we have a number of locked in. It's not some people believe. There is a range of science out there that showing that we have a number of locked in temperature increases. So, for example, when the particulate matter clears out of the atmosphere, from reduction of fossil fuel burning, etc., that clearing of the air will get a one-off warming hit because we're actually being slightly masked from the sun's energy by that particulate matter. So I personally think we're heading for way beyond 1.5 degrees. I cannot see that we're going to be able to limit that. And I think anyone who feels like we could meet that 1.5 degrees must be in some sort of denial or collusion, because you just have to look at the Keeling curve. You just have to look at the parts per million on the Keeling curve, and it's going up and up and up. And it's last year's emissions, May 2018 to May 2019, was the highest emissions ever in a 12-month period. So these data points don't show any sign of slowing down. But at the same time, it's easy to think things are good by reading. People want to read smiley, happy stuff. And yes, there's some G7 meeting about to happen in some posh place of the world's leading fashion houses about looking at sustainable fashion. And I just shared it on LinkedIn just earlier today. And I'm afraid I'd possibly come across a little bit cheeky when also in my LinkedIn material, but I think it needs to be said, that these people can agree all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, consumption's got to go down.
Yes.
So I suppose answering your question, coming back to your point, what do I actually believe? Part of me thinks we probably have gone past the point, but I'm choosing to not allow that part of me to be the majority because it would prevent me from acting. And attempting to be a moral being with integrity, I have to hold on, not in a sort of blind hope thing, but hold on to it to the sense that we don't actually know for sure. So we better bloody well, excuse my language, but bloody well do as much as we possibly can to have a chance. And also, if we don't know exactly where the tipping point is, what I feel is clear when one really thinks about it and connects emotionally and in a pragmatic sense, is the journey from here to there, wherever there is going to be full of bleeding misery. I mean, and we need to try and make whatever that journey is as human and humane as we can, without allowing what's happening in the world to keep on going, which is, obviously the rise of the right and fascism and all the rest of it, which is just and coming from originally from a Jewish background with some grandparents coming and escaping from Nazis in Europe and so on. That sort of stuff chimes chords with me big time, and I don't want society to go in that direction. But it's already heading in that direction, isn't it? There's so many signs, and as resources get more scarce, it's going to prompt more of that. So I don't want that world. I think all of these things go hand in hand, and trying to wake society up to get this change before it's genuinely too late is, there's very little that comes above that in my priority list, to be honest.
When I do presentations, people come up to me and say, well, what can I do?
Yeah.
That's a very difficult question to answer, I find. The answer I take is basically support governments and urge governments to take action, because it's only governments that can take the action of sufficient magnitude to have any effect. But what would you say?
Oh, it's a good question, and I also get asked that kind of question on a regular basis. And that's one reason why I wrote the article that I did on LinkedIn in about May time. I wrote an article on how to declare your own climate emergency, partly to speak to that question. And I think, like most things in life, it's multifactorial and it's a both and. Because I also find, I think so in a lot of conversations I have, what shows up is a kind of triangle, if you don't mind the spatial metaphor that people talk about. There's government, there's business and corporations, and then there's public and consumers, and that those 3 points of a triangle. And depending on what, and they're all humans, they're all people in all of those, and all those people usually inhabit more than one space because everyone's a consumer. But depending on what hat a person's got on, they blame the others. They blame that we can't, we can't do anything. Business can't do anything without government setting the framework. Governments don't want to change until enough consumers or voters want change. So they just go round and round the bloody triangle, blaming each other. But I think actually, as I've gone through lots of reflections in recent months about all of this, I think it's not actually a triangle; it's a square or a rhombus or whatever. Because the fourth point is the media. So I think the media have an enormous role to play, hence some of the other stuff that I've posted on LinkedIn. And the media have an enormous role to play, an enormous obligation. If I worked in the media, I'd find it pretty hard to look myself in the mirror right now, if I hadn't, done my duty. And there's so few media outlets who've done their duty on this stuff and are justified, doing what's right now. But I think all the my short answer to coming back to what can individuals do is take action on all of those fronts. So of course we need system change. Without system change, we can't decarbonize the energy supply, etc., etc., etc. All of the things that they can't completely change the agricultural system and turn linear economy to a circular economy. Of course, we need bigger system change for that. But from where I sit, and I know some people say individual action is pointless. I don't believe individual action is pointless. I think it's both, because at the end of the day, if we are to get system change, whether that's carbon taxes, meat taxes, reduction on flying, changes in food production, whatever, you can preempt what needs to happen and start doing it. So why wait for government to create taxes and incentives and disincentives? Why not just start doing it? So I think we can start, that's how, so I don't fly anymore, etc., 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 because actually it's going to have to stop, so I may as well stop it before someone makes me stop it. So I think there's that piece to it. I think there's also a kind of change maker piece to the individual action that, if we not only make changes in our life, but tell our friends, family, communities, business partners, etc., etc., that we're making these changes, that helps to get the conversations out there, So I've had all sorts of conversations with people about the fact that I'm not flying anymore, for example, or whatever else I've done or doing. But I think personally, I would absolutely say on top of all of that, that for everyone who feels that in any way they can support movements like Extinction Rebellion or Christian Climate Action or whatever, climate activism movements they can, school strikes or whatever, that in any way people should support those movements if they feel that they can in any way, whether that's directly being involved directly in any way, of which there are lots of ways to do without being arrested, or whether it's donating, or whether it's just sharing stuff on social media, or as much as possible, because these movements are not extremists, and we know from history and the social sciences that systemic large-scale changes do not happen through being polite. And they don't even really happen through the ballot box. They happen through non-violent direct action. And there's plenty of research that shows that over decades and decades, that's how significant system change happens, is through non-violent direct action. And I hadn't bodily engaged with all of that until the last year. But it just totally makes sense. It's logical and as well as emotionally sensible. Emotionally, I'm totally engaged in this stuff, as you can probably tell, but actually I'm also a pretty logical, rational, geeky kind of person. And it does rationally make sense. The data what makes it different.
Well, I shall be down in London on the 7th of October.
Yeah.
I will avoid getting arrested, I'm afraid. I did hear somebody from Extinction Rebellion who was asked, well, what should we do? To which he said, that's not our role. It's just to stimulate government to do things. I thought that was a bit of a cop-out, but perhaps he was in a minority.
Okay, yeah, this kind of question comes up quite often in conversation about exiles. So Extinction Rebellion doesn't, we don't see our role to dictate to people specifically what changes need to happen, for many reasons. One is that there are lots of clever people and scientists and researchers and so on who've worked out sorts of changes that need to happen, like Project Drawdown, etc. They're just not happening. So it's not the question of what needs to happen, it's the question of the need to happen. A bit like you were saying before in our conversation, it's the action we're short of, Anthony, not the words. So, and as a movement, Exile doesn't want to dictate, because actually, we need more and better democracy, not less democracy. So that's why the third demand is there in terms of having citizens' assemblies to be legally binding to create informed policy guidance for government that government needs to actually use to guide its actions, based on the evidence and based on a randomly selected representative body of the population, who don't have to make short-term decisions, because of course we know that our current system, not only the first past the post, which doesn't help very much either, but also the short-termism does not allow and doesn't encourage any thinking longer than 2, 3, 4 years. And if ever long-term thinking was needed, it's this. We need to be thinking not just decades, but generations ahead and longer, because just from the sheer fact that CO2 can last hundreds, if not thousands of years, we've got to be thinking long-term, and we've got to turn this supertank around in a way that requires a level of human leadership that we've never seen before. So it's actually an inspiring opportunity for humans to be their absolute best. But in order to have that, we need to have we need the truth to be told, so that people genuinely understand the truth. And clearly, there's a lot more awareness of climate issues now from the media, but there's still an awful lot of lack of understanding and misunderstanding of the actual nature and scale and pace of the urgency.
So we need action, not words. And you've got a conference coming up, the Ethical Consumption Conference, Avoiding Greenwash, because there is a big temptation in the corporate sector to be seen to be doing something, although it may only be superficial.
Yeah. Well, thank you for mentioning that, Anthony. Yeah, it's actually not a conference. It's not that big, but it is an event. So one of the hats that I wear, as well as exec coach and XR activist and whatever, is as the lead for the Greater Manchester area for a network called Women in Sustainability. So I've been involved in that for a few months now, and it's a network which is across the UK and expanding out internationally as well. And it supports women who work in or want to work in any aspect of sustainability to build their resilience, their personal development, their ability to make a difference. As well as their own, career and opportunities, but to make the difference that they want to make, really. So we have events every 2 or 3 months in the centre of Manchester. And yes, you're right. This next event coming up in the middle of September is an event specifically around ethical consumption and avoiding greenwash. That's one of the topics that our members highlighted that they'd be interested in. So we've got a really great speaker, Joanna Long from the Ethical Consumer Organisation, coming to talk about that, and it'll be a really good event. I think for me, avoiding greenwash is so important because it's an absolute bandwagon now, isn't it? It's an absolute bandwagon, and I think there's a lot of disinformation and a lot of consumers who will might be influenced by bits of greenwash when if you actually knew the reality, that it would be far from the truth.
Right, so if people contact you via LinkedIn, you can give them the details of this, can you?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I've recently reposted the advert for the event. So yeah, they'll either see it on the feed or they can contact me on LinkedIn and I'll happily share the details. They're really friendly. It is a women in sustainability event, so it's a women's networking event. So any guys, please don't contact me, but please do pass it on to contact female colleagues. Yes, I'd be really pleased to welcome more members. It's a really friendly and confidential space. So yeah, delighted to do that.
Zoe, thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to talk to the Sustainable Futures Report. There's a tremendous amount of information there. I applaud you going to the XR event in October in London. I'll be there. I hope other people who listen to the Sustainable Futures Report will be there, because you've laid out the fact that it is so important that we get some very, very significant and fundamental actions taken. Otherwise, we have got a very, very bleak future. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, and look forward to perhaps having a follow-up podcast later on in the year.
Right, that'll be great.
Zoe Cohen. I'll certainly keep in touch with Zoe, and we'll see how her court case turns out. Unfortunately, all this seems so unreal at the moment, at least in the UK, where, as I commented last week, we are going through a constitutional crisis with an obsessive fixation on leaving the EU. We need to get the government's attention on the climate crisis. Much more than attention, we need action. As Zoe said, we know from history and the social sciences that systemic large-scale political changes do not happen through being polite. I'm almost lost for words when it comes to ending this episode. It is so difficult to persuade people to examine the detail of their views on Brexit, even without trying to change their minds, that it makes me very pessimistic about persuading them to accept that changes are needed to meet the climate crisis. Still, it won't stop me presenting this message. It won't stop a lot of people from coming together in London and all over the world next month to continue to call for action. Don't forget, next week, next Friday, the 20th of September, there will not only be another Sustainable Futures Report, but another school strike. This looks like a big one. It's going to cause argument and it's going to cause debate. At the very least, let's all work together to keep the conversation going. That's it for this week. I'm Anthony Day. That was the Sustainable Futures Report. As I said, there will be another episode next week. I'm not sure what it'll contain, but I have a couple of interviews coming up which should link stand-up comedy, self-driving cars and archaeology with the climate crisis. All will be revealed once I've finalised the details. Before I go, thank you for listening. If you're a patron, thank you for being a patron. If you're not and you'd like to be a patron, then go to the website patreon.com/SFR, patreon.com/SFR, where you'll find all the details. I'm Anthony Day, and that's it for another week.